Welcome to today's webinar. We have called it How Successful Leaders Get Even Better. You have been invited to this program because, like us, you're a lifetime learner with a passion to be the best in your field, or you're responsible to develop effective leaders or teams in your organization, or you want to bring out the best of your direct reports and increase your effectiveness. Most importantly, you want an effective approach that guarantees results. As we share our insights into today's topic over the next hour, please submit your comments through the chat box, and if we don't get to your question, we'll respond to them over the next few days. This webinar is based on the work developed by Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who was recently cited by the Harvard Business School as the #1 guru in leadership in the world. His book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, sold the most copies of any leadership book the year that it came out. This webinar is brought to you by the combined efforts of myself, Diane Davidson, Janice Thompson, and Luis Velasquez. Hello, Luis. How are you doing?
I am doing well, Diane. How are you today?
Very good. Can we forward the slide? And Janice Thompson, how's it going, Janice?
Just great, Diane. Excited to be here.
We are all certified stakeholder-centered coaches in Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. With us today, we have Dr. Frank Wagner. He has become known as the coach's coach. Marshall entrusted Frank, along with Chris Coffey, to design the training for certifying coaches. We're happy to have you here with us today, Frank, and he's going to share his insights over the years. Hello, Frank.
Thank you for asking me to join.
So how do successful leaders get even better? That's really the question here, isn't it? Janice will give us the premise of stakeholder-centered coaching. Luis will share the process. I'll share some of the results we've seen, as well as some global research. Then you can decide for yourself. We will also have a drawing for a prize, which we will explain at the close. So let's start with the premise. Janice?
Thank you, Diane.
Oops, forward.
Can we forward that slide, Luis? Sorry. Oh, not going. All right, here we go. How true is this statement? Peter Drucker, who was Marshall's mentor and close friend, had this piece of advice for us. Take a moment to think about your organizations. When was the last time you were at a retreat or a training session and the title was Stupid Things Our Top People Do That We Need to Stop Doing Now? This process is all about creating change in behavior and improving the success of a leader. Some people may choose to work on something totally new that they want to get better at. For many executives, it's about eliminating something that they're doing that is a bad habit. In Marshall's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, he talks about the often unrecognizable habits that a leader would benefit from by stopping. In other words, doing the opposite of those annoying habits, like adding too much value, the overwhelming desire to add our 2 cents to every single discussion, or starting with no, but, or however, the overuse of these negative qualifiers that secretly say, I'm right and you're wrong. Or how about one of my all-time favorites, punishing the messenger? The misguided need to attack the innocent who are usually only trying to help. That would shut change down in a New York minute. And I think Marshall says it the best. All things being equal, your people's skills, or lack of them, become more pronounced the higher up in the organization you go. In fact, even when all things are not equal, your people's skills often make the difference in how high you go. So let's talk about the beliefs of successful people. There are 3 of them, and it's a reoccurring theme because stakeholder-centered coaching is based on these beliefs. Stakeholder-centered coaching is a disciplined practice or process where a leader chooses a development goal and a relevant stakeholders and are recruited and used to help the leader achieve a positive long-term change in leadership behavior. There are 3 interrelated and reinforcing beliefs of successful people. You see them here. Belief number 1, I am successful. The strength often is confidence in that successful leader. The challenge sometimes is a little bit of arrogance. Belief number 2, I choose to succeed. The strength here is ownership and commitment to the goal at all costs. And the challenge might be self-delusion, or a belief that because that worked for you in the past, it will work for you in the future. And belief number 3, I will succeed. That's really the successful leader's strength in optimism and persistence, and the challenge of winning too much and not letting go. That's where a stakeholder-centered coach can really make the difference in my experience. But let's ask Frank. What experience have you had, Frank? Can you give us an example?
Thanks, Janice. Yes, first of all, the brilliance I think that Marshall brought to this process was, understanding that there's a upside and a downside to the beliefs that successful people have, and you need to put together a process that builds on the positive sides of these beliefs, the confidence, the commitment, the optimism, the persistence is needed. Yet there's this dark side to these beliefs that, Janice, you already mentioned, where people can be arrogant, they can be superstitious, they can take the wrong path to their own development. And a perfect example in some senior leaders is such things as, should I work on my listening skills or should I work on my coaching skills? And the reality is they are lousy at both of those things, yet their belief set is, well, wait a minute, I got to where I am and I've been a lousy listener. They don't deny that they're a lousy listener. They don't deny that they're a lousy coach, yet they start thinking that I am successful because of those beliefs, not in spite of those beliefs. So you have to help a process, which you're going to talk about next, which is really grounded in these beliefs.
All right, great, thanks, Frank. So let's take a look at the next piece of our framework here. And I might need a help on the slide here, Louise. Thank you. You got it?
Got it.
Okay, so we've got this set of powerful beliefs in a successful leader. So how does stakeholder-centered coaching really build on that as a lever for behavior change? Well, it all starts with the first focus, which is attention to your stakeholders. In fact, Marshall's research has shown that those around the leader, those who interact with that person being coached on a frequent basis, really are the best experts in how the leader's behavior can improve with them. This is really a key differentiator in the stakeholder-centered coaching process. And I like to think of it really as a systems approach that will include those stakeholders who essentially they become the true coaches for the leader undergoing the development. And for the coach like me and Diane and Louise, that means we're stepping into the background and acting as the orchestra conductor of sorts. So the next phase of this is involving feed forward rather than feed back. Now, feed forward is a technical term that Marshall coined for a very simple process. It's all about suggestions for the future. So imagine that you're driving. I think of it as a driving experience, and when you look over the steering wheel, you see two things. You see your windshield in front of you, and you see that rear view mirror. Now, the view behind us is akin to feedback. Notice the lightning strike. You don't know what you've just gone through there. And it's where you've already been. You've already traveled there. The rest of the vision is directed toward the front of us. This is akin to feed forward. In fact, research shows it's much more effective to be focused on the future and not the past. So feed forward is that process of asking for suggestions for future action. And then finally, the last principle in the stakeholder-centered coaching framework is changing behavior and the perception of the behavior by the leader stakeholders in parallel. That's another key differentiator of this process. It's not only the leader who must change, but the perception of stakeholders regarding that behavior. So hopefully this is making some sense. We're going to review just quickly, now that we put the methodology together in a visual. We start with the 3 beliefs of all successful leaders. I am successful, I choose to succeed, I will succeed. We build on that with the 3 principles. Involve your stakeholders, emphasize feed forward, and change behavior and perceptions. And then that outer circle is a 7-step process that's really a practical guide. It's not theory, it's action. It's ask, listen, think, respond, change, follow up. Luis will spend some more time talking about that in a few minutes. So Frank, this sounds like a very powerful process for a successful leader. Most executives will say they don't have a lot of time to spend with a coach. Would you agree? And what makes stakeholder-centered coaching process a methodology that's so efficient for leaders?
Well, yeah, Janice, first of all, I totally agree. I mean, nobody seems to have enough time to do anything these days, or at least anything important. They get sidetracked so easily with all the demands in the 7x24 communication world we live in. So you need a process that is very time efficient. What's nice and different about our process is it's not about the coach, and it's not about our time with the leader that's important. It's about the time the leader spends with their stakeholders that's important. And the skills that they have to employ in improving themselves is going to their stakeholders in that outer ring, you know, asking, listening, and thanking. And if done correctly, this is something that only takes a couple of minutes in conversation because they're focused on a particular goal. And so, yes, you need to consider time efficiency in anything you do today.
Absolutely. And let's talk just for a second, Frank, about some of those common development goals before I have Luis share the process. This is a list of the common goals that we often see. And I challenge everyone on the call right now to see if they can find one area that they would like to get better at. I bet you can't pick just one. So what are the typical things that leaders work on? Let me preface this by saying it takes courage, humility, and discipline to do this work. The coach collects data from the leader's stakeholders and asks them what the leader could get better at. This is where the courage and humility comes in. Usually there are a number of behaviors that get generated that look like this list. Then we ask the leader to identify maybe 3 goals from that stakeholder and pick just one to work on. That's it, just one. And that's where the discipline really kicks in. So, Frank, leadership change is a simple process. It's a simple concept, but it certainly isn't easy. I've seen some leaders working on 2 and even 3 development goals at one time. What's the best model, and why, in your experience, is it better to maybe focus on fewer rather than more?
Well, historically, I mean, we've been in this business. I mean, Marshall and I started in leadership development in the late 70s. People did have more time, and the standard seemed to be the standard out of 360 was people picking 2 or 3 things to work on, and that was reasonable back then. But as I've already said, it's not reasonable today. And if you think about our process of a leader enrolling stakeholders, checking in with them, asking for both that rear view mirror feedback, asking for suggestions, it's all time consuming. And it gets complicated if you're asking them about 2 or 3 subjects. So our hard and fast rule today is pick one thing. Now, if they succeed in the one thing, they can then go on and pick other things to work on. But it really is important that they choose and prioritize and pick, for instance, one thing off of this list to work on.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice, and I know it will lead to better results. Mm-hmm.
You know, Janice, we were in a meeting the other day with a client, and the funny thing that he asked was, you know, you say you want to do a year or a 6-month engagement. What happens if you achieve your goal in the first 3 months? do you get to pick another goal?
Right. And what I said was, well, maybe you didn't select the right goal in the first place, if it's that easy, right? Because these are supposed to be things that are difficult. They're not easy to work on, and they could make a huge impact with your stakeholders.
Exactly. All right, so next up, Louise is going to talk with us about the specifics of that process.
Great.
Thank you, Janice. I really appreciate it. So as you probably know, as you probably heard, the ideal outcome of any coaching assignment is to change the behavior of the executive and the perception of his stakeholders. However, it is easier to change behavior than to change perceptions, because most coaching assignments do not involve perception change. The executive usually asks himself, I have changed. Why haven't anybody noticed? Because our process is centered around the stakeholders' perceptions from the start, both the behavior of the executive and the perception of his stakeholders are changed simultaneously. This is the differentiator of the process. Both behavior and perception are changed, making the executive a more effective leader. So guys, how is this different from any other coaching models? Frank?
Yeah, Louise, what's different about it is when we first got into this game, we used to think, as coaches, what do? We're helping a leader change her behavior, his behavior. And that the systemic approach, I think Janice mentioned it early, is that the system's going to win. The individual can change their behavior, but if the system doesn't acknowledge, reinforce, and believe that the change has taken place, they'll push the person back to prior behavior. So it's very important that the people change their perception of the leader. We often ask, on a 1 to 10 scale, how hard is it to change a behavior or change a habit? 10 being on the difficult side, and most people give the average scores are in the 8, 9 to 10 range, are the three most common answers. You ask people how hard is it to change someone's opinion of somebody else once they formed it. So the example I gave earlier is someone's a bad listener, and they start listening. People just pay attention to all the examples that verify their belief that they're a bad listener. So how hard is it to change a perception? People typically say 11 on that scale.
Wow.
I'd like to add to that too. In past coaching that I have done, it just brings to mind this one in a call center environment. And I was coaching the leader of the call center. So everybody in the call center saw that she had a coach. But they didn't know what she was working on, and she didn't engage them in that whole process. And so what happened? You walk around and maybe get some feedback on that and just find out, they go, well, she's got a coach, it has perception change. No, it hasn't. So that's what I really love about this model, is that the coach takes that back seat, and that the real work gets done between the leader and the stakeholder, because it is perceived that there's no change. And oftentimes this can backfire on an organization, because they'll say, we're spending a lot of dollars here on this coach for our leader, but we don't really see any change.
Yeah.
Where the leader is saying, I have changed. And maybe even the coach says, oh, yes, I saw what you did in that meeting, and it was a lot better. But the stakeholders don't see it because they're not engaged with it. We talk about employee engagement around initiatives. I love this, that there's employee engagement around working with the coach and the perception of that.
Yep. And that's very, thank you guys, thank you for the examples. So as you know, stakeholders in the coaching is not for everybody. We want to work with individuals that are ready to undergo this process. This process is very special. Thus we ask for the executive 3 things. As Janice explained earlier, we ask them courage to accept that they need help, humility to ask for suggestions, feed forward, and discipline to move the process forward. And of course, the stakeholder, the coaching process is centered around the stakeholder, and they have to be interdependent, meaning that they are affected by the behavior of the executive. The stakeholder also has to interact with the executive, so he is close enough to observe, and most importantly, he's willing to help, provide ongoing honest feedback, provide ongoing helpful suggestions, feed forward, And most importantly, complete the mini surveys to assess the progress. We're going to talk about the mini surveys later in the talk. So the coaching process has 3 phases or stages in order to secure a good transformation. The first one is a smart start, and it has 3 components equally important. One is we set expectations with the executive. 2 is selecting the right behaviors to develop. This is key. This is key. And finally, selecting the right stakeholders. So, for instance, take Mary. There was an executive. She wasn't a great leader. She was a superb leader. Her team was an example of a cohesive and productive unit. She was even considered to be one of the potential successors to the CEO, and she knew that. So every time she had to interact with her peers, it was like she was running for office. She was always trying to prove herself. Everybody saw that except her. So when the time came to pick the behaviors to develop, which behavior do you think that it was the ideal for her to pick? I guess, being a better team player, right? Who were the right stakeholders for her? I will say, the peers, what do you guys think? Frank?
Oh yeah, well the whole importance of the beginning of the process is, and it goes back again to the fundamental beliefs, is if people think they're successful, first of all, who do they involve, and who will they consider to be their equal or their peer, who they will listen to, and that's their professional peers. And they may not pick the right stakeholders, or if the stakeholders are selected for them, and they get measured on results, and the results aren't good, they'll discount the results of the feedback. So it's very important that the leader is seen as selecting their behavior, and that the leader selects the stakeholders, and then they will believe in the results at the end. We've had cases where, and by the way, and then you get sign off from management above, assuming it's not the CEO. And what we have found is that, with a few mistakes, by not doing these things that are called start smart, at the end of the process, the powers above say, oh, the person picked the wrong behavior, and or they picked the wrong stakeholders. So we believe the process is started correctly when the leader chooses what they're going to work on, the leader chooses the stakeholders, yet it gets verified by management above. Then you're off to you're starting smart.
Awesome. So the next step is implementing the suggestions. Action planning. Once the stakeholders are enrolled, the executive will ask them for suggestions as to what steps he or she will need to follow in order to address his developmental goals. So remember, at this time, the executive already picked his developmental goal. So now he's asking his stakeholders, what is it that I need to do to achieve this? We'll build a momentum. The executive will start implementing the suggestions given. And finally, reinforcing the stakeholders' involvement. With regularity, the executive will check in with the stakeholders. This will take 2 minutes sometimes, and he will ask them, how am I doing? Have you noticed any change? This will increase their involvement and the perception of positive change. Can you see that? That's where the magic of the process starts, is when people start changing the perception of the executive. The last step of the process is about sustaining this success that is happening. So checking in with the stakeholders is an informal tool to measure success. A mini survey is the formal tool to measure the progress. Every 90 days or so, the coach will send his mini survey to the stakeholders. It will ask for input on the level of behavior change of the executive and the frequency of interaction with the stakeholders. As you will see in the next section, the frequency of interaction is key in securing a successful assignment. The coach will review the mini survey results with the executive and adjust the process accordingly. So then what we have is the review the results and ask the question, have we accomplished what we set out to do? And finally, we plan the transition. As the executive gets better at controlling his own behavior and transformation, the coach's involvement will decrease. The final transition is dependent on the leader not reverting back to old behavior, and that is determined by the mini survey results. The leader then will be able to move forward on his own. So Frank, this is very powerful. Do you have any comments about this process?
Yes, Louise. the one thing is, I mean, when we got started with this coaching, our standard rule of thumb was it's a year-long process. And reality was it often was a 15-month to 18-month process. And people will say, well, can't we change things faster? And people can change behavior in an instant. The question is does it forge a new habit? And people that have initial success and stop too soon, and then the coach leaves, typically a year later, people say person never changed. They reverted back to old behavior. And see, what's important is to leave a leader herself or himself, and the coach leaving the engagement. It's successful when it's sustainable, and it's sustainable when the leader's now got a cadre of people around himself or herself, and they're willing to call them on their behavior, and they've learned how to do it. See, at the beginning, we often get this, I don't think stakeholders, can be honest. I don't think they know what the leader needs to do better. I don't think the leaders got the courage to ask and that stuff. You know what? Mostly that's true from our experience. Yet, see, we don't care how it starts. We care how it ends. And over a disciplined 12-month period, stakeholders start to learn not only they don't get punished if they're there to help the leader, they get themselves reinforced. The leader gets reinforcement that they're actually making the change, and then the process continues. And so, all of these phases are critical to the success of an engagement.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Frank. So, in short, this is how the process works. So you heard Janice talk about the 3 beliefs of successful people, and also the 3 components of the coaching process, which is involving the stakeholders, feed forward, addressing the behavior and the perceptions. So I would like to re-emphasize the process itself, which is based on 7 well-defined steps: asking for help, listening, thanking the stakeholder for the suggestions given, thinking about the suggestions and responding in a way that addresses those suggestions, change, but that's where behavior and perception start to change, and finally following up, meaning that if there is anything, you can start the process again, or potentially you can move to a new behavior after the completion of the process. So Diane, how have you seen executives respond to this process?
Well, at first I think executives are a little fearful. And we actually have a client who likes to use the term fearless, and I think that's where that courage comes in. We also said that they have to have the humility to hear the feedback that they're actually going to get, because a lot of times executives know, like Frank said earlier, I know I need to be a better listener, but when you hear someone actually say it to you, it's a little tough to take. And then the discipline to continue the process of asking, listening, and thanking your stakeholders. I like to do a little demo here with Janice to show you how easy this is. And I'm going to start with the ask and the listen and the thank. So I'm going to take the first 3 steps here. You ready, Janice?
I'm ready.
Okay, so as you know, I've been focusing on improving my communication skills, specifically how to be a better listener. So what are 2 suggestions that I can implement in the future to be a better listener?
Okay, Diane. First, I think focusing your attention on the other person, and maybe even getting into a physical position where you lean into the conversation a little bit. And second, don't interrupt. No matter how much you disagree or even agree with what you're hearing, don't interrupt.
Thank you. Okay, now before we continue, I just want to tell you it's simple, but it's not real easy to get that feedback. I mean, if you can imagine a bubble over my head right now with my true thoughts, see if this might be your reaction as well. She tells me that I need to have eye contact. I would probably say, well, I already have eye contact. I mean, I do the best I can. I don't want to stare people down. And when she says, don't interrupt, I'm thinking, well, I interrupt to save time, especially when I get what the person is saying. There's no need for us to continue. So does that sound familiar? those are the thoughts that it takes the courage and humility to hold back and simply, genuinely say, thank you, Janice. So that's where the coach can really help. And then, so the process continues then. And next time I see Janice in a meeting or in a break room, or I'm going to go over to Janice and say, Janice, as you know, I'm working on improving my listening skills, and I've got suggestions from you. And they were to look the person in the eye and not interrupt. Do you see a change?
You know, Diane, I actually have seen a change in staff meetings. You've been much more attentive and focused on not just me, but everyone in the room. And I've actually heard some feedback from some of our colleagues. I think, you know, you're doing well with that.
Well, thank you. And notice here, too, that I'm neither agreeing or disagreeing. I'm not defending my position or trying to explain. And as a coach, we have a process around each one of these that says, do not put yourself down, but what you want to do is be positive. In the listen, we say, don't use but, no, or however, or make excuses. Don't show impatience or anger, but maybe you might need to clarify what the person said. So the coach can help them actually make this more of a habit and a discipline. So I'd like to talk a little bit about now the follow-up that we do in the mini survey. Once the culture of Feed Forward has started to roll, we do our mini survey, and this is what's really different, again, from what I've done in the past. Our research is based upon the results of the mini survey, and it's done anonymously, and it's sent out to see how perceptions are changing. We say usually to send this out between 3 to 6 months, and we can send it out when we just need to get the pulse of what the perception is. So, you know, our egos can get in the way of this as leaders, and that ego is a pretty big wall, so we have to have the courage to take a look at these surveys and really pay attention to what they're saying. So, for example, in our research, we measured 1,000 managers who went through training first. And, you know, how many times have you had a coach following training? We say that training is a huge investment, and if there's no follow-up on that training, then it could be a big waste of money. I know I've gone to training before and said, boy, I know someone that could use this. And so there's that humility to take the training. So then the research, we did the multi-rater 360 feedback. This group met with their coach to put together a plan. The leader picked 1 or 3 areas to improve, and then a year later, after the coaching interaction, there was a 360 that was conducted, 6,000 respondents, and in that last 360, we added 3 questions. Did the manager share his or her goal with you? How frequently did your manager follow up? And on a scale of -3 to +3, did the manager improve as a leader? So let's take a look at the results. My manager did not share his or her goal and did no follow-up. So we're going to just track and follow that first question. As you see here, when they didn't share the goal, 19% saw less effectiveness. That's roughly 1/3 of the people that thought the manager got worse. Again, going back to the call center example where, you know, my leader has a coach, but I don't see a difference. And then you see that 2/3 did see perceptible improvement. Then in the next one, it says my manager shared his or her goal, but did not follow up. Now, without follow-up, 21% saw the leader as less effective. And then the +3 has almost doubled. Frank, can you talk about what's going on there?
Yes, thanks, Dan. First of all, also, just to frame this, this was our initial research that we did, and it was done in about the mid-1980s, or well, I mean, between 85 and 90. So it's a long time ago the initial research was done. And like these percentages here, like option 2, where it says my manager shared his or her goal but did not follow up, and then there's a 6% there. That's how many of the sample was described this way, that the manager went back after training, after meeting with the coach and putting together a plan, and they said, I'm working on my delegation skills, or I'm working on my collaboration skills. Yet then from that point on, over the course of the next year, there was no follow-up. Only 6% of the 1,000 managers did that. And a much higher percentage, there was 19% of people did nothing. We told everyone to go in this research to go back and share their goal and to implement their plan and follow up, yet there was literally 1/5, 1 out of 5 people didn't do it. But in the case of these first 2 options, where either the goal was or were not shared, yet the consistency is there's no follow-up, this is a fairly common pattern, which looks like almost random chance. Now, just the point I'll make about this is I have yet to have a coaching assignment where at the beginning of the coach assignment, and I was describing the mini survey to a leader, and I asked the leader, what score would you like to get on your mini survey? This is one of the few times in life I would bet money, because 100% of the time I would win money. They always tell me the same thing. What score do they want? You probably know the answer.
I want a +3.
The +3. Thank you, Louise. They want a +3 in terms of this thing. If you show them this research and you say, okay, that's great, you want a +3, if you follow this path, either option 1 or option 2, what is the likelihood you're going to get a +3? Now, here's the good news. There were leaders way back when, 20+ years ago, 30 years ago, who would not share their goal with anybody. They would keep it private. They would not follow up with anybody, yet they would diligently work to get better, and they would be perceived as getting better. The bad news, very small percentage of people achieve that. In this particular case, 7%. So if you want a +3 or anything close to a +3, you've got to do a little bit more than these 2 options. So, I'm going to turn it back to you, Diane, to go through the rest of the research.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And let's see what the results of just a little follow-up is. A little follow-up goes a long way, actually, with a 50% drop in the perception of less effectiveness. And we're starting to see 43% now at the +1. In option 4, we see that it gets a boost. There's 44% now at a +1 effectiveness, and you'll notice that the negatives are only at a 3%. So some follow-up really helps. So then let's take a look at frequent follow-up. In the work that I've done, frequent follow-up is probably the best that we ever get. And that's a good score, though. If you look at that, only 1% of the perception is that the person is less effective, and we're starting to see the fulcrum tilt toward a better perception. But let's take a look at the last slide. Drum roll, please. And that's option 6. My manager shared his or her goal and did consistent follow-up. Here we're seeing, if you add the numbers, that's 95% that the perception was in the plus area. Now, Frank, when we say consistent follow-up, what do we mean by that?
Well, again, when we first did the research, we simply used those verbal descriptors when a stakeholder or just someone who worked for or with this person was asked to evaluate what was a degree of follow-up. We didn't specify what some follow-up is. They on their own choose what that is. What we've found over the years is what generally leads to consistent follow-up is at least a monthly check-in. And once a month, you formally go and ask, like the illustration that Diane, you did with Janice, where you go to someone, you simply ask, I'm working on this, and what have you noticed, and what ideas do you have for me, over the next month, and I'll be checking in with you again. That probably is consistent. Now, could someone follow up too much? Possibly, yet we rarely have that as a problem. Usually the problem is people get busy, people are traveling, people just don't connect, and you're going to lower the score. Just the very last mini survey I did was with an executive, and it perfectly lines up with this. his peer group, his goal was with his peer group. His peer group gave him sort of between a sum to a frequent in terms of follow-up, and their scores, their overall scores of improvement were sort of between +1 and +2. Well, his manager and the founder of the company, it's like he had two managers, both said he did consistent follow-up with them, and they both gave him a score in the 2 to 3 range. So, I mean, this thing pans out time after time.
Yeah.
Well,
So in my previous job, I was working with a consulting company, and we did like thousands of 360 surveys around the world. And consistently, managers will rate themselves better than they rated their peers and their direct reports will rate them. And the secret is, if they share with them what is it that they're working on, what are they doing better, what they're trying to do, that gap will be closed. So it's very interesting to see that the perception of people is based upon the consistency of checking in with the stakeholders.
right. And, I said that we would share some other research. There's this from Strategy in Business, and it says that leadership is a contact sport. And what we show here is that 11,000 people, business leaders in 8 multinational companies on 4 continents also concluded that 95% of leaders who consistently applied the stakeholder-centered coaching process measurably improved their leadership effectiveness. 55% of those ratings at the highest level. So is this more like what leaders want to see on their results, Frank?
Absolutely. And in fact, they'll often, and by the way, these are results after a year. As you mentioned earlier, we can, I think you said this, Diane, about how, we kind of do a midterm report. If it's a year-long assignment, that's usually in the 5 to 6 month range, and then there's the one at the end. Is rarely will someone get these kinds of scores in the first 6 months. It's usually the wake-up call, and this is what they receive at the end because they increase the quality and the frequency of checking in with their stakeholders.
Right, right. And I think, Frank, that wake-up call can be really the tipping point, because I know when I've worked with successful leaders, they get a little cocky that, it's going well. They really think things are better than they are, and when we hit them with that data, that really results in change in behavior that, again, is sustainable because they take it through that whole year, and as you say, sometimes even to a 1.5 year process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Luis, I know we were talking the other day, and we were saying, what happens if a leader thinks that the behavior that needs to change doesn't really need to change? And you mentioned something about a client you had that said, well, I don't have to do that to be successful. What was that about, Luis?
Well, we were talking with this particular executive, and I was telling him about this process, and then he asked me a question, and he said, do you think Steve Jobs was a great leader? And then I said, yeah, he was a great leader. And then he said, that smirk on his face, well, he was a mean boss. And he's perceived, as a mean executive, and he's not very respectful of people. So he was comparing himself to Steve Jobs, and I was out of words. I didn't know what to say. So I said to him, "Hey, listen, it works for him, but my friend, you are not Steve Jobs." And I think that he took a little bit of offense, but it was a reality check. The fact that many times, we tend to do things thinking that that's what will make us successful when the reality is different. Frank, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, a person like Steve Jobs, by the way, when people highlight the negatives, you got to highlight, well, what was other things about Steve Jobs? And he had some strengths that are almost incomparable. I mean, you've got to be seen as a genius in understanding what people want. He also was very generous with people who succeeded for him. And, if the leader can pull that off, you say go for it. Yet, most people would say that, in fact, Steve Jobs, I'm sure, towards the end, recognized that I wasn't successful because of those negative traits. That wasn't the reason for my success. Those were things that, and again, he wouldn't want to pass on those traits to his children.
Correct. Yeah. Interesting.
So, here's the pivotal question, I think, for everybody today is if the leader measurably improves in 1 to 2 leadership growth areas, how much value would that create for your organization? Most of the common answers from HR professionals and bosses and sponsors is that it's invaluable. Frank, what is it? What do you think about that?
Well, going back to, as I think I mentioned earlier, Marshall and I got our start after getting PhDs and being assistant professors of management and decided to go into full-time consulting. We were trainers, and it was one day many, many years ago that Marshall was sitting at a debriefing session around some training, and he was with some, these senior leaders, including the CEO, and the CEO was they're waiting for the meeting to start, and the CEO starts sort of just ruminating about, this bad behavior by one of the executives, and Marshall said he wasn't paying much attention, but then what the CEO said caused attention was the guy said, gee, I would pay a fortune if this guy would change that behavior. And Marshall kind of wakes up and talk about the bubble in his head is, gee, fortune, I like a fortune. And so that's what he says that actually truly was the first time he started, getting into the coaching arena. And again, these are not things you can truly quantify, yet when you think about leadership, it's not just the positive things that affect results, it's how much of the negative things are getting in the way. And it's why Marshall's best-selling book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, the most commonly referenced part are those 20 bad habits, not the good habits that people have to get rid of to improve as a leader. You get rid of the bad stuff, people want to come to work. People want to put out the extra effort, but those bad things can just truly get in the way. So, there is at some level, I'll just say it's an intangible, but a very strong return on investment for people improving in their behavior.
Yeah. Hey, Frank, I have a quick question here. So, like most coaching assignments are based on time spent with the executive. Our process is not on, I would call it on an hourly base. Why is that important? How do you differentiate that, and why is it so important?
Well, we do two things that are different. One is, we like to see that ours is an evidence-based, results-based process. So, the value add is this leader improving in this behavior, not in their own eyes or in the coach's eyes or in HR's eyes or in senior management eyes. It's in the eyes of the stakeholders. And the question is if you think about it, here's your choice. You can hire a coach, and the coach is going to live with you. They're going to, they're not going to go to bed with you, but they get in the car with you to drive into work. They're with you 24 hours a day when you're working, and it's going to take a year for you to get better. And they're putting in this ungodly number of hours, and the coaches, and by the way, coaches, if you're being paid by the hour, are reinforced to spend what? Hours in the process. On the other hand, so that's one coach. Louise, you can hire that one coach for you. Let me give you another coach. This coach can say, look, I can just touch you on the forehead, and you're going to achieve the same results. Which is more valuable?
I guess the one that is going to touch me in my forehead.
Well, yeah, see, the thing is time is money. So if you can get the results with fewer hours, it's actually more valuable than more hours. So that's why we base ours on a contract basis. Typically, ours is a contract basis for a fee for the year for the leader to improve in that behavior. So it's not based upon hours.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks. So results are long-term. We've got some benefits here where the responsibility of this improvement is properly assigned to the leader and the stakeholders, and then the leader gets the credit, and that's actually the benefit that stands out to me the most. I have a quote from a friend. Actually, the quote's from Teddy Roosevelt, and a friend sent it to me, and it really resonated with me with the courage that it takes for successful leaders to continuously improve. Here it is. It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. And so, again, what I love about this process is that it isn't the coach that is doing the work or the coach that's getting the credit. It's actually the leader. Frank, have you seen any other benefits?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I tell you, the kind of things you keep. In many of my coaching assignments, I've actually met the spouse of the leader I'm coaching, but also in many I haven't. And probably some of my most prized mementos are getting a note from the spouse of a person I coached who I never met at the end, thanking me for coaching their spouse at work. And, obviously, what's the implication? The same behavior was showing up at home, and it's no longer showing up at home. The negatives are going away and replaced by positives. They'll say, gee, my spouse never said thank you to me before. Now they're saying thank you to me. These are all just the little things that make a big difference from our process.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, I'd like for us to hear from you now about what your key learnings are from today. And so what we'd like for you to do is to email your coach, and we're asking you a few things. What was your key learning today? What was the big insight that really rang true for you today? How are you going to implement that? And then send us your questions via chat, or you can send them to us via email. And most importantly, how can we follow up with you to help you get this process going? Now, those who respond will be entered into a drawing, and 6 winners are going to receive Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, compliments of me, and Janice, and Louise. So thank you. Okay, now Louise, before we wrap it up, I do have here ways to get in touch with us, but do you have any final words of wisdom?
Well, there are 3. I'm sitting at my desk right now, and I have a little piece of paper tape on my wall, and it reads, if you never go after what you want, you will never have it. If you don't ask for it, the answer will always be no. And if you never step up forward, you will always stay in the same place. So go for what you want, ask questions, and take that one step forward, because you never know what it might lead. And I think that stakeholder coaching is that step for many of the people that I coached. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us today. We really appreciate the value that you brought to our webinar today.
I appreciated, listening to 3 of our great coaches do their thing.
Thank you. And thank you, Janice.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So our question at the beginning of the webinar was, can successful leaders get even better? Coaches, we enthusiastically say,
absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely.
This concludes our webinar. Thank you.